I love talking to you about this kind of thing because we're sort of playing somewhere in the borderlands between fakery, forgery, and invention and scholarship. And there's some rigor, but there's also some joyful
Yeah.
make-believe.
But if you're going to have fakery, you have to then know what's the real thing. I don't think of myself as involved with fakery because I don't know what the real thing sounds like.
Hello! Welcome to the new and improved Imaginary Song Hunt, a monthly meeting of modern minds to reanimate lost songs of the deep past. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Jonathan Bingham. Hi, Jonathan.
Hello.
Who is my new collaborator on this project, along with Barnaby Brown. What's new for the Song Hunt in 2026? Well, two things. First of all, we're going to be distributing audio, not only video, and it's going to be going out every single Wednesday at 6 o'clock, so there's always something nice for you. And second, of course, I'm now working with my dear friends and colleagues, Jonathan and Barnaby Brown of Lotos Lab. And we are... What are we, Jonathan? What is Lotos Lab?
I mean, it's a question I ask myself all the time. We are a company that research and produce music and instruments from the ancient past. So everything from Stone Age through to early medieval music.
Oh, yes, very, very early music, extreme early music.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, and folk music as well. So, yeah, me and Jonathan are both, and Barnaby, all of us, we're big folkies. One of the things I've been excited to discover, having started working with you, Jonathan, is your gorgeous ballad singing voice.
Thank you.
Yes, which anyone who listened to the Christmas episode from 2025 with Alice Raw will be familiar with, because you've heard Jonathan's lovely voice singing the Cherry Tree Carol already.
Oh, yes, that was a fantastic arrangement, yeah.
We had a good time doing that.
Yeah.
So how did you meet Barnaby in the first place? How did you come to be involved in this little Cambridge nest of ancient music nerds?
So I was doing a undergraduate study at Cambridge, doing music, and I did my undergraduate dissertation on the aulos.
As you do.
Indeed.
I can't imagine they get many undergraduate dissertations on the aulos in, well, any undergraduate music course.
No, I suspect this was probably not quite the first, but almost certainly were the first at Cambridge.
So they decided to outsource
yes,
supervision, right?
we got in Barnaby to help, thanks to the amazing Sam Barrett. And at the end of that, Barnaby said, "Do you want to come and work for Lotos Lab?" So here I am.
Woohoo! And the rest is history. I mean, in fact, there must be lots of people who don't know what the aulos is, right? We're such ancient music geeks. We spend all of our time thinking about this stuff. What is the aulos, Jonathan?
I mean, how could you not know what the aulos is?
Well, how could you not want to know what the aulos is?
Indeed. So the aulos is an ancient double pipe. Our earliest complete instrument is from 2,500 BCE, and we have evidence of it through ancient Greece, through ancient Roman times. It's essentially a double oboe, so imagine playing two oboes at once. Oof. And imagine the stress that causes, and you get something of the idea of playing the aulos.
Nice description. So yeah, well, today's episode is not about the aulos. However, there is going to be lots of aulos-related material coming up in the coming year, in the coming years, in fact. But today is all about one of my musical heroes, Benjamin Bagby, who is the legend that is Benjamin Bagby.
Amazing.
Founder and director of Sequentia ensemble for medieval music. Not only one of the greatest early music performing ensembles out there, but also the ensemble that has been, since the 70s, really leading the way in the reimagining of music for which, no notation survives. So one of the original imaginary song hunters, I think.
Yeah, amazing. Legends of the field. Yeah.
Yes. So I went to Ben and I said, what lost source from the ancient musical world he most wished existed that doesn't? Why did I ask him that? Well, I had an idea that we would put this episode out on the 1st of April as an April Fool.
Yeah.
Yes, and the idea was that we would actually forge whatever Ben came up with. That was the plan. And you know what I even did? I even went on Etsy and I got this.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness. Pieces of vellum.
Pieces of vellum.
Oh, this is like a dream. Oh, amazing.
Yes.
Oh.
So that was the idea. I've got the vellum, it's all ready to go, and it wasn't quite as logistically realistic as I at first hoped. Yes. As you will discover in the course of the episode. Actually, this is something that you know from working with me and Barnaby Brown, right, Jonathan? We have this in common. I think the eyes of our imagination are bigger than the stomach of our capacity.
This is very true, but that's one of the things that makes it exciting. New ideas come out all the time, and you never know what will fly.
Yes, that's true. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it went with this episode. We embarked on a journey of discovery, which didn't end up exactly where I anticipated, but it did end up somewhere cool and interesting, and I hope you're going to find it as fascinating as we did. Thanks very much, Ben Bagby, for coming imaginary song hunting with me. I want to just say why I thought you'd be the perfect person to kick off the new imaginary song hunt, Ben, which is basically because, no offense, but you've essentially made a career out of pretend ancient music.
Yes, a musicologist friend of mine calls what I do Ben's made up stuff.
So yeah, you're the greatest of the musical make-believers in the medieval music world, some might say.
Some would say charlatan, yeah.
I never heard anyone say that. So yeah, I wanted to ask you if you could magically recover anything, any lost source from the early Middle Ages, something which is thought to have existed but doesn't exist, what would it be and why?
There's one particular written source that just pops up every time this question arises, which is a written source. We don't know if it was a book or just some pages. We have no idea what form it took, but it's described by the biographer of Charlemagne, whose name was Einhard. So he was at court for many, many years. He was a court intellectual and teacher and a good friend of the emperor, actually.
He's a big fan of the emperor as well. I mean, the biography is quite sycophantic, isn't it?
Yeah, and how? Very much so. And he describes different books that Charlemagne ordered be made, or I won't even say books, just written documents that were ordered to be made. Whether they were made or not, we don't really know. We don't know if they followed through on the project, but they were ordered in any case. And one of the things he wanted was stories of old kings or deeds of old kings. And by old kings, we don't know what old kings he means, whether he's talking about his Merovingian predecessors or kings in a mythical past or closer to him. And another thing he wanted was somehow a book or some kind of written source containing, and I have to get this right, barbara et antiquissima carmina, which means oldest songs in the language of the barbarians.
And that had a different meaning in the ancient world from what you might kind of instinctively imagine it were to mean today.
Barbarian literally means people that don't speak the way we speak. And that's from a Roman perspective where you're speaking a very elegant Latin and the barbarians are speaking their tongue, which is incomprehensible and sounds like blah, 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 blah. So this is some kind of manuscript or some kind of source which was given as a project by Charlemagne to his court, to the scriptorium, which means somebody somewhere had to collect these texts and somebody somewhere had to edit them, organize them, decide what goes in and what goes out, and make good versions of them and bring them into writing. And that's an especially difficult task because of the fact that the German languages needed to use Latin letters.
Right.
And the Latin letters were created for writing Latin, but not for writing these crazy Germanic tongues or things like Icelandic, which you know well from our work together is ill-suited to the Latin alphabet.
Yeah, and of course, in those days, nothing like that was standardized. To even do it at all was totally innovative.
Absolutely nothing was standardized. So you can imagine at court there was some kind of meeting with the emperor, and he said, I want this to be done. And everybody nodded and said, yes, of course, it will be done. And but maybe they didn't know how to go about doing it. And they had to also find informants, people who knew these texts, because they were all existing in oral tradition. And many of them perhaps had died out of oral tradition, were considered no longer interesting.
By this particular point in time, by this kind of Carolingian golden age, these songs were already antiquated, dying out. This was a kind of act of preservation in a way.
Yeah, so it's in a way Charlemagne saying, look, people, I'm interested in early music. Let's collect some old songs that people don't sing anymore.
Yeah.
And I think he meant it more in the sense of stories. Mm-hmm. So epic song, which tells dynastic stories, or stories like the chanson de geste of a later period, which tells about battles and dynastic struggles and things like that, sort of Game of Thronesy family stories.
And of course, in the early medieval period, the telling of stories and the singing of songs were not necessarily separate things, and the way that news was conveyed and the way that lineages were remembered and narrated and preserved relied on speaking out loud.
Yeah, and it was, of course, what Albert Lord called the singer of tales, who has this particular function in any given society, which is pre-literate. This particular man, and it's usually a man, has in his head everything you need to do to know to identify who the people are. So he's the memory of the tribe or the people. And so he's an incredibly important element of the functioning of society, because without him, we have no history. Mm-hmm. And we can't identify who we are, and we can't identify the genealogies of our leaders. We can't enumerate the great battles we won that made us the best people in the world. So the whole public relations machine of a given society is requiring the talent of this one person. So it's incredibly important.
Yeah, and you have spent a lot of your life becoming this bard, this ancient bard.
For one tiny itsy bitsy slice of history, yes, I've tried to slip into that role and sort of inhabit it in my own crude way and find out what that feels like to be the person that knows this story or a given story.
And why is it such kind of catnip to you, this culture? I mean, the sort of the ancient Germanic epic and the singer of tales. What draws you to it so much, do you think?
I think it's mostly because of the dynamic of society that requires memory. And if you can identify who you are by placing yourself at a time and a place with other people and deeds, great things that were done in the past, you can identify who you are, and you can identify what makes you special. And I think every people wants to believe that it is the special group. And I think that it all hinges on convincing ourselves that this is true by talking about our past.
And that's the rhetoric of this type of storytelling, the kind of the exaggeration of the heroism, which makes it so colorful and so exciting to convey in performance, I guess.
Yeah, and when you hear it, you are reinforced in your identity as a Frank or whatever kind of person you may be. So the people who are listening to this performer. They're made more affirmed in their identity. You get to the end and you say, God, we're fantastic, aren't we? We always were and we always will be.
And so, I mean, the formulaic kind of character of the language of a lot of ancient poems that get associated with this lost oral tradition must be a really big part of that, because sense of we feeling is very much enhanced by kind of shared anticipation and fulfillment of something. You know, you know it's coming. Oh, this is the point at which everyone says it's behind you or whatever, and there's a kind of sense of togetherness that comes from that. That must have been.
And of course, it lives on today. I mean, almost all Hollywood films play on that in one way or another. When Charlemagne was asking for these old texts, these old songs, the antiquissima, carmina, he's definitely looking for a look into the past of his own people.
And just for a little bit of context, can you just say a little bit more about who Charlemagne was and who the ancient peoples were that he was, collecting songs from?
I mean, this court is already quite focused on being Frankish. That's their identity. And that, of course, got split later into what became France and what became German-speaking lands. But they were just Franks in the earliest period. And if you look back to Romans occupying north of the Alps, you have an author like Tacitus who wrote a book called Germania, where he talks about the peoples he ran into up there. And it's all these tribe names we've never heard of and had weird warlike ways of dealing with Romans, who were the hated invaders, of course. And you see that society was highly fragmented. You couldn't travel 10 kilometers without changing tribes. And it was dangerous. And it was like being in any kind of wilderness where there's no central authority. They're just local authorities. Mm-hmm. And so if you travel much, good luck to you, because you're going to be improvising your way out of a jam every 10 miles. What Charlemagne managed to do somehow was to consolidate these many, many, many local entities into one identity. Mm-hmm. It didn't happen exactly like that. It's not that he wrote a decree one morning, I'm going to consolidate everything into one empire. It happened over time, but he was the one who really made it solidified.
So that kind of gives an idea of just what an undertaking, going around and collecting songs from diverse groups of people, all unified in this empire, but still very separate.
Well, let's just take any story that we know, like the Beowulf epic. There's a king being threatened by an awful, monstrous entity that has brought social life to a standstill and it's called into question the authority of the king. And how are we going to get out of this problem? A hero is going to arrive from somewhere else. At the time before Charlemagne, you might have had 500 different versions of the story, that it was a kind of archetypical story that was found in many, many societies in different forms, with different names for the monsters and different names for the hero. And the basic idea is the same, but in its detail and how it's worked out, it depends on the skill of the performer. And in the case of the Beowulf text that we have inherited today, it comes from one single source, which just happens to have survived. And it represents also a collision between this particular pagan story and the Christian faith. So it got in a kind of crazy funhouse mirror room with Christianity and was transformed in that way. But you can imagine that Charlemagne was looking for the best when he ordered this manuscript to be made. He wasn't like saying, I want 5,000 versions of the same story. He probably really wanted to have the very best from all of the barbarian language groups in his realm.
It's not the case that Charlemagne's scribes were going out trying to notate and preserve the most faithful possible representation of the full diversity of
Yeah.
traditions that existed in the day.
They
They
probably
wanted,
didn't get that far. They just were looking in the immediate vicinity.
and also showing something that they thought was good, which probably
Yeah.
meant doing a fair bit of making it up themselves and doing the old Cecil Sharp kind of
Yeah.
twisting and bowdlerizing and frankifying it.
Making a good version. Yeah. Well, also remember that an emperor like Charlemagne wasn't somebody living in a castle and everything came to him. He was in Aachen. He had a palace and he had his own church and all of that. But he needed, as an emperor, to be traveling a great deal. And he went to Rome 4 times. That's when you consider how hard it was to go to Rome in the 8th and 9th centuries. That's an amazing feat. So he was traveling a lot. And so on his travels, he certainly came in contact with strange practices and songs that he'd never heard before. And he might have then said to one of his courtiers, "This interests me. Do these people speak our language? Can we communicate? Maybe in Latin, maybe in Greek." Because he spoke Latin, it seems, quite well. And Greek, Einhard says he spoke Greek rather well, but probably he got by. So he was definitely in circulation. He wasn't sitting all cooped up in his castle, depending on people coming to him. He got around.
Which actually brings me to another one of my questions, which is your previous work, because it sort of feels like you've been circling this one lost source for decades and decades, because you've dealt with so many repertories and pieces of documentary evidence that are kind of peripheral. Yeah, do you feel like you're kind of dancing around this lost source? And can you talk a bit about some of the projects that are kind of related?
One of the earliest ones that I got involved with was when we recorded Cantigas de Santa Maria of Alfonso el Sabio. So it's 13th century. It's quite late, actually. But it really got more going with the Beowulf epic. It's a sort of groundwork laying project that sort of is where I established a sort of way of working. Then moving on to the Icelandic texts of the poetic Edda.
Yeah.
Which is something I'd been involved with for many years, just because I love the text so much. And then, of course, there was Chant Wars, which was a project in 2003, 2002, which was a co-production between my ensemble and the ensemble Dialogos, directed by Katarina Livljanic. And she's a real chant expert. She really knows about these things, which I only have a vaguest impression of. We were looking at Gallican chant, at Germanic chant, at Roman chant, and Old Roman chant. So there's so many different chant traditions. It's amazing. And by the way, that brings me to a book, another book down my list of books I would love to have.
Hit me.
Especially in the 20th century, there's been a huge musicological discussion about why we don't have notated chant books until quite late. And everybody's saying that it just doesn't make sense. There should have been earlier notated chant books that tell us about the melodies. That they're just manuscripts with texts, and the melodies come so much later. They come in the 9th century. And there was a great scholar of chant, manuscripts and chant, named Kenneth Levy, and he was convinced that somewhere there was a missing manuscript that would be the keystone of the whole thing. And if you could just drop that in, everything would make sense. And he called it Charlemagne's Neumed Antiphoner. And it was going to be a big book, completely full of notation and neumes. And it was going to show us how they sang chant in Aachen at the Imperial Chapel.
Yeah, wouldn't that be handy?
Yeah. And of course, his colleagues with whom he was in disagreement were all saying that there's this and this reason why you'll never find that manuscript. And he was convinced we would. And now he's gone and we'll never know. So,
what would it mean for history, for musicology, if this source showed up? What do you think the implications would be, the ruptures.
Well, if somebody found that neumed antiphonor of Charlemagne, it would make them need to rewrite the last 150 years of musicology because it would mean that there was a book, and of course books were symbols of authority. If you were having an argument with another cantor about a melody, and you could point to a place in the book with the neumes, and you could see there are 3 notes on this syllable, not 2 the way you're singing it, 3 the way I sing it. Book would be the ultimate arbiter of taste and truth. So this book would contain all of the liturgy of the church in its notated form, correct, and the way Charlemagne expected to hear it. That would be like the imperial standard. We don't have an imperial standard written tradition. I mean, he didn't send guys to Rome to sit down and copy manuscripts. He could have done that.
Mm-hmm.
He sent 2 singers just to hang out and pretend they were there for some other reason and learn all the songs by heart.
Yeah. And in a way, the survival, the kind of the limited survival of written documentation of these traditions, it really that really supports that, right?
Yeah.
Because things didn't get written down a lot because they weren't needed.
Yeah.
Because everyone was used to learning it.
You write down the things that you really need to have written down. Mm-hmm. Usually it's an exception or something that's not performed regularly.
And for Charlemagne's barbarian songbook,
yeah,
if this
I get excited hearing you say that.
Charlemagne's barbarian songbook.
Oh, yes. Bring it on.
This act of writing is something totally exceptional. It's not for practical use, it's for posterity. And it's something, it's a kind of once in a generation event almost.
Yeah.
At a very large scale.
For instance, we don't have a German equivalent of Beowulf. There's no big epic in Old High German, which parallels the Beowulf epic, which is, more than 3,000 verses. It's really huge and quite special. And we don't have that kind of thing in Saxon or German, but we do have some small fragments of epic poetry which show that it was known. And one of these is called the Hildebrandslied, which is the story of the father meeting his son on the battle between 2 knights who are doing single combat in front of their armies to decide. And they have to identify themselves before they fight, and they do this very formal introductions. I am the son of so-and-so, and as they're doing it, the older knight recognizes that the younger knight that he's about to fight is his son, and he lost the son because he went into exile, I guess with a pregnant wife at home, and he realizes that he either has to kill his son or be killed by his son. It's a famous story, and it occurs in very many different manifestations, but the only one in German is this one about Hildebrand, who's the father, and Hadubrand, who's the son. And of course, the son is a hot-headed young man who just wants to fight. He hates the old guy. He thinks he's stupid. And the older man sees that this is his son, and he calls out to the gods, and he basically says, fate goes as it must. And then they start fighting, and that's where it breaks off. We don't know how it ends. So from other sources, we know the father kills the son.
Is it incomplete?
It's incomplete. It's a palimpsest even. It's written in some other book between the lines. I mean, they basically used another manuscript that was out of use.
Oh, right. Yes. Okay.
Parchment being so dear, they didn't want to prepare fresh parchment for this. They just sketched it in between the lines.
That happens a fair bit with musical sources, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a common. I mean, space is space. You fill it with what you can.
So I'm particularly interested in this because James and I were chatting the other week about how we're actually going to forge this this lost songbook, because obviously we're going to do it. Well, and that to fake an entire 9th century book is just
Beautiful, beautiful.
completely out of the question. Whereas a single leaf, or imagining that one of these songs or a couple of these songs have been copied onto another manuscript somewhere, or there's been there's been some rubbing out and reorganizing, that's something that could actually realistically happen, and you could potentially fake. So let's go back to the musical imaginary realm, because it's it's like it's the kind of sonic equivalent in a way. And I love talking to you about this kind of thing, because we're sort of playing somewhere in the borderlands between fakery, forgery, and invention and scholarship. And there's some rigor, but there's also some joyful make-believe.
But if you're going to have fakery, you have to then know what's the real thing. I don't think of myself as involved with fakery, because I don't know what the real thing sounds like.
Well, yes, and some transparency, I suppose, because someone who's doing a fake is trying to fool people into thinking that what they're producing is the real thing.
Yeah, we never ever said stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And almost in a way, when you're dealing in imaginaries and performance, I mean, this is a controversial thing to say, but you might say...
Careful.
It's more honest than some forms of scholarship, even very, very rigorous scholarship, because there's a lot of people who when they're transmitting their scholarship are trying to say, well, I'm right and he's wrong.
Yeah.
And in performance, you're never saying that. You're just saying, this is what I want to do right now.
Yeah. Well, I think, for instance, nobody could be more rigorous scientifically than Sam. And when working on those Bohemian Metra, you wouldn't believe the lengths we went to find the truth about a given song.
I mean, I would, because I read that book and it took me over a year just to read it.
It's one of the best introductions to medieval music ever written. It's hiding in that book is a brilliant introduction to early medieval song. But he really used everything imaginable of the scientific variety to get to the bottom of what makes this song tick. But at the end, in order to perform the song, we had to then take it to another level. And other questions came up that could not be answered with scientific study. I mean, you can look at the neumes and you can talk about the text and the metrics and the structure, and there are lots and lots of things to talk about that can be solved, or at least approached scientifically. But at the moment of making it into a performance, you have to transcend some of these discussions to deal with rhetorical questions.
Yeah.
To deal with things about use of the voice or an accompanying instrument, perhaps. And at that moment, Sam was also fantastic about opening up the discussion to these intangibles. So I think the best scholarship is one that combines this rigor we've been talking about, of which I consider Sam to be, the absolute master, and also this openness to transformative energy into performance.
Yeah, that's a really lovely way of framing the power of collaboration between scholars and performers. And it's sort of true the other way around, for early music performers, openness to scholarly rigor and willingness to do the homework and engage and to really listen to the people who have spent careers developing expertise in particular repertoires, is that produces something really incredible.
We had this rehearsal during our period when we were at Pembroke College, and the university sent a team with a video camera to just make a little recording, for PR purposes, because everything now has to be on the internet somewhere.
Let's not even. What are we doing right now.
They sent these people. They barged into our rehearsal and they said, "You mind if we just record a little bit?" And you know, it
It's
was
going to capture some content.
no problem. You know, we just kept doing what we were doing, and they stayed for 2 or 3 minutes, and then they were gone. The next day on YouTube, there was this tiny little snippet that we had recorded for them with the title, Cambridge Professor Discovers 1,000-Year-Old Song. Lost for 1,000 years. Rediscovered by Cambridge Professor. It got like 500,000 hits the first day. And suddenly, Cambridge University was very interested in our project. They had found that nerve. They'd touched that nerve, which was something that had been silent for 1,000 years was audible again, thanks to scholarship.
And that temptation, I think, is, you know, that's so exciting for not, you know, for everyone across the whole spectrum of kind of levels of rigor. You know, from your kind of reenactment group that are having a bit of fun getting dressed up and making something up, to somebody who spends over a decade working, you know, on one source. You're like a part of everyone on that whole spectrum is desperate to uncover the truth.
Yes. Yeah.
And some people will claim to have done so.
You know, Sam never said that.
No, I'm sure he didn't. I'm just imagining his reaction
yeah.
when he saw that, that headline.
He was flabbergasted.
To go back to our lost source that we're going to uncover, and we're going to make these exact claims for it, and we're going to win the internet with some small print somewhere saying it's all a fake. What have you learned from these kinds of collaborations? Because it's not just Sam Barrett. I know you've done a lot. You've worked very closely with scholars on many projects. What have you learned about the kind of detective work that might be needed to make up a source like this?
I think for me, it's always about the text. I'm not obsessing about neumes or melodies or any of that stuff at the beginning of my working process. It's always, why did everybody adore this story so much? When it was living its life at its time, in its place. What is it about that story? What is it about the Hildebrandslied that grips us even today? You know, the confrontation of father and son. So it's very basic emotional values like parenthood or belonging to a tribe or a family. And I think that that's what I want to capture. That's what I want the performance to be about, not about the melody or about the rhythm or about the use of an instrument or not. I want it to be about the raw emotional quality that made that song so important to people.
For you, in order to kind of channel that, what's the kind of weighting of the research into cultural context that must be needed to speculate about what narratives have what meaning for what people at what time, and a kind of psycho-historical way of interpreting the texts and also your own subjective life experiences?
Oh, it's a little bit the work of an actor, that you're imagining yourself into the personality of somebody who is not you and who's living a life you would never lead.
A long, long, long time ago.
Who knows? I mean, I don't know. If I were a mystical new agey kind of guy, maybe I would say that I'm channeling some.
Are you not a mystical
of myself that existed 1,000 years ago? Who knows?
So you're not a mystical new agey kind of guy then?
No, I'm not. Really not. At least I don't think of myself.
Not yet.
Not yet. And I never use that as my excuse. I never use that as my explanation for anything I do. That I'm channeling some earlier form of myself.
Yeah.
What I'm interested in is, what is the story telling us, and what did it tell them? It was never new. I think these stories were never new. They were just constantly evolving.
Absolutely.
I mean, you could make a Beowulf story that's today would be not the same one. You just have to have terror of a beast that wants to kill you for no reason, and the hero saving the old king. You don't need much else than that.
So that you're working with archetypes, essentially.
You said it, lady. Yeah, it's very archetypical work.
Yeah.
And it's not for nothing that these stories always grab us.
So you don't get obsessed with neumes.
No.
Like I can obviously believe that you're all about the story. Sure, you're an amazing storyteller and very compelling. But you don't get obsessed about neumes because you don't see yourself as a paleographer and you're aware of the kind of rigor that can go into that sort of very scientific reconstruction. But you do, in a way, because you've done a lot of that work in the past and it's there in your body and it's in your performance practice.
Yeah.
So you're drawing on something when you make a melody for text for which no melody survives, or for what we're going to do here, which is we're going to invent the whole thing. You're
Right.
going to have to do this, so let's talk about it. What can you talk about the knowledge that you have absorbed into your practice, and the way that you work with modes in order, and gestures more than modes, and formulas in order to come up with melodies for lost songs?
Well, it's interesting. The idea of a melody is, for me, kind of a 19th century idea.
Fair.
It's like, I always think of Beethoven with his sketchbook, filing away at a melody and really making it perfect.
Something written, essentially.
Yeah, he needs to write it down to work on it. Well, I don't think of melodies as being what I'm all about, but definitely gestures. And the first gesture, the basic one, like the point of departure for every project, is always recitation tone.
Mm-hmm.
Which,
and can you explain what that means?
Well, it means that you have a text which has a certain number of syllables, and you want every one of those syllables to be enunciated with one note. And in a recitation, it's the same note. So if I'm talking to Steph and I'm talking about the idea of a melody, I'm always having one note to one syllable, like that. That's a recitation. So it sounds like psalmody.
Yeah.
You would say, oh, he's singing a psalm. Yes and no. I mean, it's yes, the same principle as psalmody, but psalmody is a very particular Christian form of liturgical worship, which is necessary to get through, like in the Benedictine order. You've got to sing all 150 psalms every week. So you better get to it, because it's going to take a long time.
Yeah,
That's
you don't want
singing.
Lots of notes per syllable, dragging it out for longer than necessary.
Also, that's just the psalmody, and then there's everything around it, the things that come before it and after it, and that reflect it, and that meditate on it. So it's a basic move for the human voice and for a text to sing psalmody or recitation. I don't call it psalmody because it's, to me, just recitation tone.
Yeah.
And it's a point of departure. And once you have this recitation tone determined, and if it works, you start to realize that not all syllables are the same. And that's a moment of great interest, because then you say, okay, if they're not the same, how are they different? Is it about length? Is it about accent? Is it about the number of tones we're going to sing? And if we're going to sing other tones, what are those tones going to be? And then we start unraveling the whole thing, and it becomes more and more complex. And we start to make decisions which are going to predetermine what the next decision will be. So we're solving a series of little binary problems as we march through the forest. Why are we turning left here, or are we turning right? And if we're turning left, is there water? Is there no water? Is there a spider? Is there no spider? Is there?
And so different languages give you sort of different clues or maps for how you navigate through this dangerous spider-filled terrain.
Yeah,
right?
And sometimes it remains quite simple, and sometimes it becomes quite complex. That it can become the melody or the recitation, whatever you want to call it, can become more melismatic or pneumatic, so it has several notes to one syllable. And then you have to think, why am I doing that? What's inspiring me to make that decision? Is it because of the importance of the text? Or is it because of the nature of this text, that it's drawn out, it's longer, it's more important, it has more gravitas than other texts? For instance, is it a death lament that I'm singing now? Or am I talking about walking from point A to point B? There's two different stories. This recitation tone is kind of the beginning of everything, and it gives birth to any number of moves in any number of directions. So it's wide open. It's the most wide open thing you can do because it has no context. If it's a recitation tone, it doesn't have a beginning formula and an ending formula and a medium formula. It's just recitation. So you don't have any context, which means you have no mode yet. And as soon as you add a second note to that, you give it a context. Like if I have a series of tones and then I sing one tone below that tone, I have suddenly a final note and a sub-final note. And if I add a third note, then I've really locked it in. And at that moment, I'm starting to, whether I want to or not, I'm starting to create modal gestures.
Mm-hmm.
And one or two of them might stick, and I might start repeating it. And then I've got a structure. And then I might decide to go somewhere else with it and come back to that structure. I've got a refrain, and I'm building something without even trying. And that's the way I try to see it, how it sort of organically grows. That's kind of the way I do all of my work. And admittedly, I have usually an instrument that's accompanying what I do, giving me lots of context, because the instrument is usually a harp, usually has 6 strings, and those 6 strings must be tuned in some way.
The instrument is as much of a kind of constraint as any source knowledge or the way
Yes.
that you analyze the text. Yeah, and it's not just the instrument itself, it's your years and years of playing it and your habitus,
Yeah, because I've got my riffs that I always play. It's not endlessly new.
Yeah.
It's a lot of using material that I know and I've played many, many times. But sometimes in a new combination, in a new structure with the text, it's always evolving. It's never exactly the same twice.
When you're dealing with this kind of music making, storytelling, ballads, epics, sameness, the concept of sameness has to be redefined.
Yeah.
I think because we have a very literature or conditioned understanding of what sameness is this exact kind of reproduction of this shape followed by this one in this exact order, whereas kind of sameness in an oral tradition is singing that song with these gestures, order, unimportant.
Yeah, exactly. And the idea of sameness is in our minds it's a bit more mechanical.
Yeah.
It's reproducing the same thing over and over. And I think in the pre-industrial era, that idea of reproduction, mechanical reproduction, didn't really exist yet. It was same-ishness more than sameness.
So for our forgery, the most important thing that we can have is a collection of gestures, and a kind of an understanding of we need to know the instrument that's accompanying, right? We have our...
If there's an instrument, maybe there's not.
I mean, it's probably fair to say that the Germanic 6-string lyre, the harp, is a good contender. And
I'm just saying, I don't want to be dogmatic about it. It's not written in stone anywhere.
Well, no, absolutely. But we are doing this.
Yeah. We have to make some decisions.
Yeah, we have to make some decisions. We have to set some parameters. Yeah. So let's set that one, because there's plenty of evidence for self-accompanied lyre singing tradition.
Yeah.
And this is your process, and you're my co-conspirator. And you derive a lot of your your practice from the lyre, from the way that you play the lyre.
Yes.
And the way that you tune the lyre, which of course is it's not something that you've just experimentally produced. This has got documentary evidence as well, going back to antiquity. This is all very plausible, an excellent start. How would you go about coming up with a song type structure that that you think you could get away with pretending was really from some Germanic tribe at the beginning of the 9th century, or from a much older tradition?
Yeah.
Then what do we need? What do you know about the kinds of songs that you've sung? Let's just stick with the text for now.
Yeah.
That are kind of approximate.
The point of departure is always the metrical structure, and all of these Germanic poems, including the Icelandic ones that are in Germanic models, what they call Stabreimdichtung, which means staff rhyme poetry, with alliteration and with 4 stresses per line.
Mm-hmm.
So, like in Beowulf, you have him ta skyld, Joat, to Yashap, Wheeler, Fellerhor, Ferran to Freyan, where, except I don't do it like that. But that's the structure. And it has these consonant sounds as alliterative moments that bind it together because it has no rhyme at the end of the line, like later English poetry would. And that applies to most of this poetry. So I would start with a 4-stress line.
Yeah.
I'd get an expert in Old High German I would sit down and write a short fragment of the Beowulf epic, changing some details maybe, or even the names of the characters in modern English, and I would translate that into Old High German. And you could have an Old High German Beowulf fragment. That would be a sensation if such a thing were found.
Yeah, how thrilling.
Pick any little point of entry in the Beowulf story, the arrival of Grendel the first night, or the arrival of Beowulf, or the sea swimming contest with Brecka, or any of those things, and put it into Old High German instead of Old English. Change the names, maybe even change the plot a little bit, so that it's recognizably the same, but not.
Yeah.
And that would be a really cool place to start.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, how exciting.
You'd need an expert in Old High German.
But
I don't think ChatGPT is smart enough yet to do that.
Okay, so here we are. We have arrived at something resembling a plan, thanks to Ben's amazing imagination and expertise. We are reproducing a small fragment of Beowulf, or something like Beowulf, in Old High German. So we need some Old High German expertise in this team.
Yeah. Yeah, as at least according to Ben, we can't just use ChatGPT and he would know.
he would know as a ChatGPT addict.
Yes,
yeah. I mean, more as a Beowulf expert, but you know him better than I do. But it's fantastic.
Certainly not a ChatGPT addict. Oh, also a reminder to cancel ChatGPT subscriptions on account of how evil it is.
Definitely.
Many reasons not to be using AI for our manuscript forgery.
Yes. Though, that's one of the joys of being in the imagined past. We don't have AI.
Oh, yeah, thank God for that.
Yeah. But it's such an interesting question. It sounds like the amount of expertise we need doing the Old High German, the music expertise, the manuscript expertise. It sounds, we're going to need quite a massive team. And I think that just shows how we're not just recreating a source. We are imagining a whole new chapter of music and indeed literary history.
Yeah.
And social history, all sorts of things. And
absolutely.
Which, is really clearly shown in your discussion about notation with Ben.
Oh, well, then the discussion about notation, in fact, which you're not going to see because we decided not to include it in the end, it just, well, I mean, first of all, me and Ben, I think we were on Zoom for about 2 hours in the end because I just can't stop talking and asking him questions.
I mean, I don't blame you. It's amazing. It's such a joy to hear all this from Ben. It's amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's a treasure trove of information. I found myself just pushing and pushing more and more on the question of music notation because I am really desperate to, forge a bit of manuscript with a bit of lost song from Charlemagne's Songbook with music notation in it. So I was trying to think of all of these increasingly fanciful scenarios in which you could find music notation, Okay, so all of these clerics of, or the scribes from Charlemagne's court, they've known this Beowulf off by heart. It's been the oral tradition, and everybody's memorized it. So 100 years later, it's no big deal to write it down in a manuscript, or maybe there was some pedagogical reason for it. And so I just kept throwing these ideas at Ben, and he was just going, the early 9th century? No. How about that? No.
Yeah, well, it's such an interesting, at that time, it would be one of our first sources of music notation. And, for something like this, where realistically, probably the notator wouldn't know the melody. And, when you're doing early neumes, that's what you need. You need to know the melody before you can write it down. So it's,
Yes, because this was not a music notation for people to, get all the information they needed from 1,000 years later. This was a music notation for people who already knew all of the stuff because they had it from the oral tradition.
I mean, if only it were a source for us, it would just make life so much easier.
Yeah.
But yeah, it really speaks to the level of imagination that we're going to.
Yes, the most imaginary song hunt ever. And then, of course, in order to forge, what increasingly looks like it would just be a little bit of song text, the other side of it, which I didn't get into with Ben, are the resources, the materials, the expertise, the time, the money that would go into making the actual thing, the artifact, the physical manuscript.
Yeah. Going from imaginary to, well, maybe not quite, real if not authentic.
Just physical.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and I had the bit between my teeth, and I still, even after talking to Ben, was convinced that we were actually going to do this. And so I went to Cambridge University Library, where I'm sure you spent lots of time as a Cambridge undergraduate.
One of the best places on the planet.
Yes,
so good.
Yes. Copyright library, everything's in there, not just a beautiful building, and also the most incredible manuscript collection. And I had the huge privilege of speaking to James Freeman, who is a medieval manuscript specialist, and another treasure trove of knowledge and brilliance, and had the chance to ask him what might actually be involved in forging a Carolingian manuscript, or at least a bit of one.
It's so interesting. I'm so jealous that you got to go. It's amazing.
So join us next time to discover how to forge a Carolingian manuscript.